Welcome back to Man Across the New Horizons. I'm Dear Darling. I shall see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhollow today, where, you know, it's June time, so it's Pride again. To quote that song from SNL, which, you know, I've never, like, watched SNL. I only know that song because of a friend. But yeah, it's Pride Month. We'll actually be talking about it this time, rather than yesterday, despite yesterday being the 1st of June, because my friends requested a topic, and who am I to not be beholden to the whims of my friends? No, I'm joking, of course. But yeah, I mean, I spoke a little bit about Pride last year, to be perfectly honest. I don't remember exactly the things I said, but we'll see what we talk about. Hello everyone, right now in Fawnhallow, it's 6:11 p.m. on Friday, June 2nd, 2023. I guess the first thing I would want to say is that if you are, of course, anyone a part of LGBT, like whether through sexuality, identity, or something else entirely, then I just want to let you know that, of course, that is perfectly valid and you are supported here. In that regard, you know, I am LGBT friendly, you know, being part of the community myself. It's, you know, I suppose if you'd rather hypocritical if I were, if I weren't, but hypocrisy aside or not, yes, I just, you know, you genuinely be supported here. You know, this is a promotion of LGBT safe spaces and, you know, not meanness, you know, just like it sounds stupid to say because it's like, you know, I'm going to treat you like a normal human being, which is like the bare minimum, to be perfectly honest, but it's almost a little bit sad, but I have to say it. But yes, you are supported is what I would say. And if you're not, you know, if you're not part of the thing, not part of that community necessarily, but you are still an ally, that's also awesome too. We support allies supporting us as well. But yeah, I talked about Pride a little bit last year. Obviously, you know, things to do with Pride and sexuality and identity, some of it is quite personal to me, so it's not exactly something I talk about all that often because it's, you know, it's personal, isn't it? I don't mind talking about like my personal anecdotes from like primary school or something, but it's rather different being like talking about my own previous like struggles with my own identity or sexuality and that sort of thing. But, you know, I also need to have a sense of self-awareness about things in general, that I have an audience. And certainly while it was true, more true, I suppose, in early days of a channel where, you know, basically no one watched. Nowadays, you know, we're creeping up on 500 subscribers, which in YouTube terms, it's not a lot, but it's still a decent amount of people who probably, you know, watch my videos every single day and want to talk about certain things, or, you know, people basically I should set an example or sense to, or people I can reach with positive messages. So while I won't delve into like everything to do with LGBTness and Pride, I suppose, with regards to myself, I will, you know, talk about it a little bit. Yeah, to be a level I'm comfortable, so don't worry. I guess it's, you know, the difference between sort of, because I don't really mind talking like to my friends personally about the story if they ask me anything. It doesn't really come up that often in conversation, to be honest, which probably part of it is because it is random to bring up, certainly, but it's also because it doesn't need to anymore. But it's just a difference between like sitting down with a friend, I suppose, and talking about it and sort of like yelling out into the public void and then my friends being in the crowd or something. It's a quite a different situation. So I hope you would understand that certain things like this don't always get that level of conversational attention, I suppose, for me. But yeah, anyway, LGBT stuff, you know, Pride, rainbows, etc, etc. If you don't know, I think I've spoken about this before a little bit, but yes, I am pansexual, or I consider myself to be pan, and I am trans. Specifically, I was born male and then transitioned to being female, which happened, it's been quite a few years now. It actually like basically coincided with the pandemic, because well, okay, to be fair, internally I knew for like ages, but then like the first person I think I told was around, I was still in university, I think. I'm pretty sure I was still in university. So it would have been last year uni, which would have been 2019. So sometime, you know, early 2019, and then I socially transitioned, I think, towards the end of 2019. So I would guess around my birthday time, sometime in autumn, I can't remember. And then, you know, I started medically transitioning. I don't remember exactly when I started medically transitioning. Late 2019 as well, I think. No, I do remember because I transitioned on one of my friend's birthdays, which was the 11th of November. That's when I started my medical transition. And then the pandemic happened for 3 years. And then, you know, here we are at the end of it. It's been, it's been about 3.5 years. No, for 4 years, I guess, technically, if you start the secrets and transition, there's always different things like that. yeah, and it's weird because I don't know, it's not something that is talked about all that often, but because I was both trans and not straight, I suppose. Not often I say I'm like bi or pan or whatever, and it kind of depends on the audience I'm talking to, because some people don't know what pan is. At least the way I take pan to be is that in any relationship, in any intimate relationship I have, gender identity is a non-factor. Well, I shouldn't say non-factor, but more like it does not affect my, like, I don't know, it's so weird, I don't know how to phrase it. It's like potential levels of attraction. Like, I don't really care. It's not like I was gonna say I don't care about your gender identity in that sense, but that sounds rude. I don't mean it like in a dismissive, like I don't care what you are. I mean it in a sense as like it will not affect me either way. That's basically how I take it to be. But not everyone knows what pan means, and that's totally fine. I mean, people sometimes go to certain extremes, I suppose, of being quite exclusionary. I know there's a lot of terms, of course, in the LGBT space, and I'm not invalidating any of them. I'm just saying that, a lot of people don't know them, so I don't mind explaining it if people ask, but sometimes, you can't be bothered, and sometimes you just go, you're bi, and most people know what bi is, so, I don't really know what to really say about it. Like, what do I even say in general about it? It's sort of like a tell my story sort of thing, but I'm not here to really tell my story. I'm just sort of here to vibe and have, talk about random stuff. It's a huge tangent. It's weird to say because I'm both trans and non-straight. It always sometimes falls by the wayside, the fact that, I don't have a straight sexuality or sexual orientation. Not that of course, these things in the grand scheme of things don't matter if you're a sensible human. Well, I'd say sensible, living being in general. It doesn't really matter, but it's something which people don't really think about all that much, I suppose. Because obviously I came out as trans to a lot of my friends, and it was sort of just like, oh, I came out trans. Oh yeah, also by the way, I'm like pan. But it's like it doesn't. It's sort of like almost like an afterthought at this point. I guess we're both kind of like afterthoughts now, because at least the way I have a relationship with my own identity and sexuality is like, I just kind of like, it's just that, it's just like another facet of me. It's not a defining part of me, Some and loads of people go through completely different relationships. Some people outright reject it, and some people completely embrace it and make it their identity or personality, and that's fine. Everyone's basically free to do what they want. But the important part is that people have the option to choose and are not shunned or unfairly treated, I suppose, because of it. But unfortunately, that's not quite the world we live in. But it's getting better, is what I'd say. There's certain, and I think this is what I talked about last year, was about the corporations picking up Pride, which to me, obviously, it's not great. On the scale of things, when in an ideal world, would you like, your identity or your beliefs, sexual orientation, I suppose, to be like churned through the capitalist machine? No, but it is, I suppose, a sign where it's now, kind of like more profitable, I suppose, to be on the right side of history than the wrong side, right? Which is progress in a certain sense. It's not ideal, certainly, but it's at least a good sign, I think, for me, because that's kind of like a inevitable, death and taxes sort of inevitability of a society we live in. So at least it being incorporated is, in a sense, is rather than outright rejected, is a good thing. Because certainly nowadays I feel like you fall into one of three camps. One, you're wholly accepting and supporting. The other is you don't really mind or don't really care. You're not involved in it, but it doesn't really bother you either. You're not going to actively, you don't actively necessarily go out your way to support, or don't actively go out your way to hate on people, or you're anti it, you hate it, and that sort of thing. I feel like nowadays a lot more people are certainly shifting into that middle ground sort of thing, hopefully. At least it's sort of like with personal anecdotes of people you have experiences with, I would say. If you go on the internet, there's a lot of doom and gloom about these sort of things, but the thing with internet is they tend to be quite a perpetual negative cycle or positive cycle, like echo chambers, that's a word, depending on the, because that's how things become profitable on the internet. You show people the things that they want to see and affirm their own beliefs, so those sort of circles just stay within themselves, which can end up being quite unrepresentative of humanity. I'm just going to speak from my own personal experience, but because luckily I suppose I live in the UK, which is I mean, it's reasonably supportive. On the grand scale of things, you know, out of all the countries in the world, it's pretty high up there on, you know, being supportive on LGBT fronts. You know, I still have rights and that sort of thing. There's still a good chunk of a population who are very supportive. And that has generally been my own personal experience, even with like both friends and relatives and strangers, which is it's very fortunate for my regard. I don't mean to sit here and brag and be like, ooh, look how great my friends and family are, because they are obviously amazing, but it's just, you know, fortunate for my own regard. Not for my own regard, that was not what I meant. It's fortunate for me, you know, and I'm thankful for it. It's not something I take for granted, but I know not everyone's always that lucky, and it really is unfortunate, which is, you know, kind of why I think awareness about, you know, pride and LGBT things in general is quite important, despite the fact, obviously, it's not something that I do all the time, because to me, it's not that I'm ashamed of it or anything. It's just more, you know, there are many different facets to my personality, you know. Things take turns, I suppose, in the spotlight, shall we say. So it doesn't always come up because, you know, people are multidimensional in a sense. But it's still important, I think, to give it that time in the spotlight, because especially with things like YouTube, not even YouTube, even outside of YouTube, even like your real life, you are constantly, you know, there are people who know you, there are people who might look up to you, there are people who respect you, or people who don't even know you but will see you perhaps not necessarily as a source of inspiration, but if they see you being able to live your life counter to what used to be, you know, shunned and reviled, can give them inspiration, can give them hope in a sense, you know, just to be like, yeah, I can do that too. So that's a sort of like self-awareness, not self-awareness, but that's your awareness, you know, you got to have about these sort of things where, you know, even if it's not a huge part of your personality, it's still something which you should be proud of. It's still something which you shouldn't necessarily hide, I suppose, in that sense. So even though it's not something I bring up in conversation all that often, I'm not just like, hey, I'm trans, because I don't know, it's just not really what I do. It's not something I will deny, and it's not something I'm like combating, I suppose, in a sense, because there's always going to be people out there, you know, trans teens who, you know, or people in general just figuring out their own identity, who, you know, it's nice to be able to have someone that you can turn to in a sense and be like, yeah, they can do it, I can do it too, right? And it's just like humans are social creatures. That applies to basically anything, so this shouldn't be an exception, is what I mean. I feel like I'm dancing around some sort, and I don't even know what point I'm dancing around it. I'm just sort of saying in general. So yeah, I guess my own personal story, because probably I didn't talk about it much last year. I don't really know, because I think that's one of the first times I like properly mentioned it on the channel, to be perfectly honest. Like, and I don't really know what to say about my own sort of experiences about it. You know, I knew from, or at least I should say, I had an inkling from a very young age that I was, you know, different in that sense. Like, I don't know, when did people start feeling like romantic, possibly romantic attractions or things like that, in teenage, like pubescent age, that sort of thing? I mean, to me, I think it was very clear early on. I was like, oh yeah, I'm probably bi, or something along those lines. And weirdly to say, that is something I accepted like very, very much with open arms, like almost immediately. Is again, it's something which is not like I tutored it or anything. Like I was like, oh, you know, I got to make this known to everyone, because I mean, most things I kind of keep to myself a lot of the time. It's only when it comes up and it is relevant I will bring it up, but otherwise it's sort of like a, you know, that I guess the onus is not on me to explain to you, because it doesn't matter, you know, something you can find out eventually. So yeah, it's weird to think about the fact that, you know, I very much welcomed it with open arms when whatever age, you know, then that sort of realization kicked in. But probably I'm going to guess it's somewhere around from 10 to 11, you know, that sounds about right. 10 to 11, 12, 13, you know, when you start looking at other people, be like, hey, you know, is this love? Is this friendship? Who knows? But yeah, but of course my own sense of identity is something which remained rejected for a much longer time. I suppose it's to do with the level of acceptance in it, you know, at least when I was younger. I remember, you know, the way that, you know, trans people are talked about now is kind of like how gay and lesbian people, I suppose, were talked about, where it's still sort of like being pushed for. Obviously, we still have like a long ways to go for social equality for not just LGBT populations, but for all populations. Of course, you know, like black lives, minorities, etc., etc. But, you know, progress is progress nonetheless. Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. So, I don't know, maybe that sort of contributed, you know, that sort of fact where, and I was just like, oh yeah, you know, bi is just, you know, being bi or whatever. But it's weird because, you know, I went to secondary school and it's sort of like people weren't necessarily all that great with LGBT stuff and that sort of thing. I actually went to an all boys school, which I don't know if I ever really mentioned. But you know, British all boys school. It wasn't the worst, I suppose, mainly because I of course was never very public with that sort of thing. But you know, I was always. I suppose I was significantly more effeminate, shall we say, or feminine leaning, I suppose, compared to most of the other people have at school. But it was a sort of thing where, you know, as I say before, you know, I had a very blissful experience through school in general. I'd not necessarily sure why, but you know, I assume I chalk some of it up to the fact that I was quite smart and a very hardworking student. So a lot of people, you know, saw me as like a valedictorian type, and thus, you know, I was not a target for anything. But not everyone, of course, was necessarily as fortunate as, and sometimes things can always be a little more underhanded than I suppose as directly as in, you know, high school dramas and Disney Channel see with bullies and that sort of thing. But that's not really what I'm here to talk about. So my own identity, you know, I think it was around the same sort of age where, you know, I was just like, it's weird because I very much remember from a very young age, I was always like calling myself a girl and that sort of thing. I was, you know how it's like there's a concept of a tomboy. I used to call myself a tom girl when I was younger. Why? And well, I mean, obviously now you know why, but at that point, you know, it didn't really occur to me why. I suppose it just sort of like, you know, I liked being thought of as a girl more than as a boy for whatever reason. I mean, and this is normally where you do things like, oh, you know, I always did like stereotypically girl things or feminine things or whatever, and that like was the signs. But I don't really like saying that because, you know, that those aren't stereotypically feminine things or stereotypically masculine things. I don't think are, or some, depending on the things like hobbies, for example, are not necessarily a great indicator for if you are of your identity. Like there isn't a correlation so much as a social pressure correlation, right? I mean, it's still true in my regard. I tend to favour things which are more stereotypically seen as feminine rather than masculine. But that's not always the case, you know. Things like maths and sciences tend to be quite male-dominated environments, but were still things I liked a lot. It was still things I loved. So, you know, that doesn't always come to pass. But, yeah, I guess it was from a young age, you know, the idea of, like, portraying myself as female was always, it's weird because at that time, you know, when you're really young and you don't really understand, you know, I suppose the consequences of social actions and social pressure, peer pressures and that sort of thing is, you know, that's just the norm. You know, I didn't mind being the girl or whatever, you know, whenever we like did like role play and stuff like this, I would be like the mum or I'd be someone like that, and it was just like the norm, you know. And I grew my hair out because I was like, I want like long hair like a girl, so I'd put it up like in a ponytail and things like that. And then I remember I went to the all boys school, and then I suppose that's when the sort of more of a rejection side of it started coming in, because there, you know, there was a hair rule. You couldn't have your hair too long, so I had to cut it. I still had like a kind of like a bob sort of hairstyle, I guess, but you know, it wasn't really a bob, but still, as long as I could get it. But like, it had to keep your hair off the back collar, which is just like pointless, I would say. You know, a very antiquated. It was a very sort of not extremely traditional, but a pretty reasonably traditional sort of boys' school, which is like, and it's not really a place to flourish in, I suppose, when it comes to your own identity. And yeah, anyway, there's not really much to say, because from that period, from like in secondary school all the way up to like university, I was just like, you know, and I can't remember at what age, you know, maybe around like 15, you know, I learned about being, I remember I watched a documentary or something about being trans, and I was like, wow, this like really applies to me. I was like, wow, I feel the same way, you know, that sort of thing. I mean, it was just sort of like, oh yeah, you know, I probably am this thing, but it's sort of like, you know, watching a documentary and seeing all the troubles that woman went through, and I was like, I can't do that. And like even hearing about it and like researching about trans stuff online, I was like, there's no way I could live that life. That would, you know, that would like be the death of me. And it's like, that all that struggles, I could not survive it in that sense. And then university happens, and I went to a much more liberal area, I suppose, of a university, and people, of course, are much more embracing of their identity. I remember because there was someone in my class who studied maths as me, who was trans. He was, you know, a trans male, and I was like, whoa, you know. I guess it was sort of eye-opening, being like, whoa, you can just like be trans and like live a normal life to a certain extent. And I'm like, that's crazy, you know. More power to him. Never spoke to him. We weren't like very close friends or anything, but he was pretty cool. And I suppose from there it was like a long series of questioning, you know, going to see people, discussion about it, and then eventually transitioning by going to a gender clinic. And you know, I socially transitioned for a while anyway. I suppose it was quite helpful because, you know, I had feminine interests. I always, to be fair, when I was younger, I was already mistaken for like a woman many times. Like I remember in China, when I visited, like every single time, everyone thought I was a girl. Sorry, a little bit of pause. Where everyone thought I was a girl, not a boy, and that just sort of like, you know, I guess that transpired to what it is now. Like the social transition in general was relatively easy for me. You know, my voice before, and even now, is still like quite ambiguous. You know, I have quite feminine features, I suppose, in general, and you know, and my like I suppose interests lie in quite feminine or mannerisms in the first place. So it was quite smooth, which is fortunate, I suppose, in that regard. And yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to say. You know, obviously I'm skipping out all the finer details about that sort of thing. But and then, you know, I went to the clinic and I got like evaluated and I got diagnosed with gender dysphoria, got medication, and you know, then the rest is kind of history, and it's kind of been that way for 3 years. And honestly, it's been great. I would say if you're questioning, you know, it's a sort of thing. If you're questioning your identity in general, you know, you should, I suppose, in general, question it. Not in the sense of, oh, you think you're wrong or anything, but it's totally fine to be able to question your identity, whether you are, you know, cis or trans. It's totally fine to basically just check in with yourself, and it's totally also fine just to, you know, I can't remember the way it was phrased, but I saw someone phrase it as like, it's totally fine to check in with yourself, and it's totally fine if after you check in with yourself, you go, yep, everything's good here. But that's basically it, you know. People should have safe spaces to experiment and that sort of thing, and part of having a safe space to experiment is the fact that the consequences for both saying yes and both saying no and saying I'm still not sure are equal. You know, they're all fine. But that's how it should be, you know, ideal world. But we don't live in that ideal world yet, but one day I hope we can get there. So I don't know, I didn't really talk all that much about my my own experiences of that sort of thing. Feel free to share your own. Feel free to, you know, just type in chat being like, woo, it's Pride again, or that sort of thing, or rainbows. I don't know. Do whatever you want to do. I'm all here for it. But I guess I'll just sort of round off this episode here. So I suppose happy Pride. And if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been the Home Across New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares greatly appreciated. Twitter, Discord down below. Hope we can see each other again. But for now, it's our farewells. Until next time. Oh, that's not right. Bye bye for now. And it's Pride again.